Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I will present some work in chronological order from the early work till where I'm standing at the moment. And in between I will have a short, just a couple of slides with 20th century architectural history and the reason for why we live in the world we do. For me, architecture is, or the way I work is built a lot on agony, and it's sort of like a fight. And I think this image represents the work quite a lot. It's from the Kafka's The Trial. You're always fighting against something. It can be a client or your inner demons. We live in I live in a country which has developed an extreme poor climate for architecture, a diluted, non-visionary phase, and it's rather ruthless. Still, or yet, we have an extremely interesting, rich architectural history. We tend to live now with more global values, which is something that really affects the whole society. And I think that my work is, I'm trying to work against this. And the process you will see now is sort of like also a personal journey through my, by aging and by learning more about architecture. So the early works is sort of like a part of my history, but maybe doesn't represent what I'm doing now. But I think for educationally wise, it's interesting maybe for you to see. I started my my work as more a graphic art work, learning how to deal with a letter on a sheet of paper. Where do you place the letter, and what kind of mood can you create with that? So my first work was mainly two-dimensional, and this was for me quite a good way to start to learn proportions and by only having like one dimension to work with. And then after that I continue with furnitures. I saw furnitures as I see them as objects. It's the same way I see my architectural projects. They are more objects, sometimes within a context or sometimes outside a context. And I handle the design decisions in the same way. Actually, if it's a chair or if it's like the last project, a school. I think, as many other architects we've heard, I am also really interested in archetypes with small sensitive gestures to create a mood or a feeling or a recognition or a reminisce from something. Can be past, but it always has something to do with an experience or something that visually you have seen before, a reference in the way they come out depends a lot what kind of material and what kind of process the products or the houses or the architecture is done in. For instance, for furniture, in Sweden we have a quite poor industry. It's a farmer country. We know how to bend wires like this chair because we do springs to the Volvo trucks, but we cannot mold a chair in one piece like they do in Italy. We might do hockey helmets, but that's the biggest we can do. So with these limitations, I think they are very important for the final product. You have to work with the material and use the strength of the material to create the atmosphere you want. In this case, this is a very simple stackable garden chair where the arm chair is sort of like the theme for it. It's you get the reference from maybe a classic garden chair in a French garden or whatever. But it's just a small gesture, and that's it. It's also dealing with the products. You always have to, I mean, I always try to have a reason for them to exist. So if you come up with a new idea, it should be something that adds an architectural or form value. And it can be a feeling or something to react to. This is a bookshelf for a Danish company called Hay. And it's actually just a rescaled Meccano that I got from my dad that he got in the 50s. That's something we also I work a lot with when it comes to bigger building scale. I'm very interested in the change of scale, how you scale displacement. Just with small variations, you can create a lot of tension. This is just CNC cut folded metal. It's also very cheap and simple way production, yeah. This is an ashtray, an early work when you still were allowed to smoke at the restaurants. This is also quite formalistic approach. It's an archetype of maybe a Roman pillar. It's also a hunage or a sort of like link to a more postmodernistic way of working with forms. It could have similarity to what Sotsas and the Memphis group did. And it's also a way of describing the procedure of putting out your cigarette. You put your cigarette in the cup, and it falls down in the tube, and it ends up in a container filled with water. This is a knockdown table I did for an exhibition once. It's all about the structure, the load-bearing structure, and emphasizing the different parts of the table. It's done without any screws, so you can get it in a flat package. And the main feature is the I-beam that sort of holds the table together. And I think this is also representing the way of using the different materials and the different techniques. The beam used directly reflect to something, a structure, and it's also stabilizing. You have the glass top that is more abstract. After my work with the furnitures, every year you went down to Milan for the furniture fair, and every year you were supposed to produce something new and unique. It's the furniture business is quite fast. It's not as fast as music or fashion, but after that I would say furnitures. So every year you need something new. And for me this is it's interesting, but it's also rather disturbing or annoying to always push everything and try to always do something more unique every year. I got a little bit tired of that fashion way of working. I wanted a slower process. So as I'm educating architect, I thought now it's maybe time to do something in a little bigger scale. So my first years I've worked with quite many private houses. This is one example that is not built. Mainly, most of them are not built. This is a villa for an architect, for a Swedish artist, painter, called Andreas Eriksson, who lives out in the countryside. This is also, my early work is quite formalistic. And it's all about the small twists, moving a window, working with the facades more like graphic sheets of paper. working both from the inside and from the outside. Also working with archetypes, the pitched roof, the reference to a church or whatever it can be in the context. This is a project I did together with a colleague of me, Oskar Kaufmann in Austria. We were put together for a fair in Milan, and we were supposed to do prefabricated small houses. And since this was sort of the first building I did, I wanted to be the archetype of the building, I imagine, as a kid. And that's the classical symbol of a little box with a pitched roof. So we did that, and we tried to keep it as clean as possible, like the image of the house. So we reduced all the detailing to sort of not exist. It's a house done in Porto plywood, 76 millimeters thick, CNC cut like a gingerbread house. And all the openings are cut out of the structure, so we don't have any frames. The hinges are connected directly to the structure. So it's sort of like an abstract version of a little house. And this is after that, I didn't seem to get any clients. So I thought maybe I do something myself. So I took the money I had and bought a little property outside Stockholm. And I couldn't buy a nice property, so I had to buy one by a quite traffic road in an area, a suburban area, with a very diverse group of houses. It was summer houses. It was like houses from the 60s, the 80s, the 90s, prefabricated houses. It was really not the context that I considered of interest. It was rather disturbing for my formalistic investigation. This is the house. This is the first draft, and this is how I wanted the house to look in the end. So this first project was not about material. It was not about detailing, which I later in my work understand that this is maybe the most important thing in architecture. This was all about form and defining space and directing people. You see the little stair towards the entrance to get a sequence of rooms with as little effort as possible. And the site is triangular, and it's a little bit sloping. And I orientated the house on the top of the little hill and just did a little twist. And with that twist, the whole house, the whole interior space divides the different rooms. So it's, since I would say from the first project, I've always, for every project, I try to investigate a new thing that I couldn't handle before. And since I can't handle so many things at the time, it tend to be, in this case, it was form, and it was sheets of paper. The next one might be the material, and the next one another thing. Here's the building. It's totally abstract, and it's white because I guess I wanted it to be blank, referring to paper. This is the entrance. Here I also try to work with, play with the linear perspective, the depth of rooms, and make it almost as artificial as possible, as abstract as possible. Here's just the floor plans where these, I think it's 7 walls, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yeah. Where this tilt of the building makes a space, makes 2 spaces, a living space and a kitchen, and that's about it. And the upper floor is not much to say. And this is the interior. This was a very low budget project, so it's not it's all spinning around the defining of space, and the small varieties in scale, like you see the little door into the, I think that's to the cleaning room. And that house, it's a major problem in Sweden that they appeal the building permissions, the neighbors, because they don't want to see anything different from that they're used to. So this house was 1 year of appealing. And during that time, I lost all my money. And then exactly when I got the possibility to sell the house, we got the bank crisis. So I would say it was break even in terms of money, but mentally it was very, very hard. I lost my hair during that period. So it seems like every project, after the project, I have to take some time off to start a new one. This is a villa outside Gothenburg with the overlook of the sea. It's a residential suburb, and this is also with a quite poor quality of the surrounding buildings. A lot of prefabricated houses from the 90s. So this was also a project that was difficult to handle the context. And all the buildings they do around the coast in Sweden, they tend to do pastiche of old summer houses, mainly in wood. And but they don't have the same craftsmanship as they had during these days, so they look really absurd. And I wanted to have another idea about the house, and the way you when you drive from the city out to this area, you pass as sort of like a wasteland. It's an industrial landscape, almost like the intro to the movie Sopranos, when he goes from New York out to New Jersey. It's the same type of landscape with these factories with corrugated metal. This is where we find the factory of Volvo and big oil tanks and so on. So these were my inspiration of the building. This is the first draft, and this was also the way I wanted the end result to look. The house is now working a little bit with the typography and sort of like climbing along this stretch of land. And here I think it's the work is now formalistic, but also materialized. I wanted it to be abstract in a distance, but approaching the building, I wanted it to be more concrete. And also have a quite... the placement of the windows are still a graphical way of working with two-dimensional surfaces, but they're also a result of the inner circulation of the space. Since this is in a rather beautiful area, but with a lot of poor architecture around, it was very important for me to sort of direct the way the outlooks you got in the different rooms and create qualities. Maybe you had a view over the sea, or you had a view over a tree outside, or sort of like organizing the inner space so that the beauty from the outside would be present within the building. This is just a site. It's 6 facades. And the directions of the angles of the different of the facades are based on both the topography, but also for the views from the different inner spaces. And here is the facade. It's in corrugated metal, CNC folded. And I wanted it to be abstract, but still then with detailing. So in this project, it was all about how the windows were placed on the facade. And here is front elevation. And here's an entrance. This is also these small gestures, the same way like the first chair you saw, that somehow that these, with small subtle gestures, you do like a little hint that here's the entrance. By these small characters, you also make the different facades of the volume personalized. So this is something I work more and more with now, with the projects I do now. These buildings are still abstract in terms of load-bearing structures. It's more volumes. This is just a plan with the inner core and the circulation around the stair where you get the different rooms. To the left you have the kitchen, and to the right you have the living space. Here's the entrance door seen from the living space. And here it's also the play of perspective rather than maybe scale in this project, with the small angles of the walls. Still very abstract. It's white, which was actually the client's request. And here's the kitchen with a little stair. This is a summer hut on an island outside Gothenburg. This was also a project that I made for myself. I've been living in Stockholm during my whole life, and I was really tired of the urban context with all the bars and all the drinking and all the noise. So I really wanted to have some kind of resort or somewhere to redraw. And I had a project in Gothenburg, so I thought I move there and I move out on this island and do a little house, as aesthetic as possible, without any disturbing formalistic ideas, just plain simplicity. And the site is a very beautiful site, actually with overlooking the sea. There was a house at the site from the beginning, from the 50s, with an extension from the 70s. And it was on the lower part of the site of this small valley. When I got the property, the real estate broker said that tear this down and build on the highest part of the site, because then you will get a great view to the west over the sea, and you will make a lot of money. But I thought that this was, there was a reason that this was lower down in the valley because of the rain. It's raining horizontal and all the salt water. So it was for protection that they put the house here from the beginning. So I thought that that's probably where it should be. It's a very simple little hut. It's all done in pine plywood, 16 millimeters cladding on the outside and 13 millimeters on the inside. The only reference I have, the reference to the local building tradition would be that we have painted the house in black tar, the same tar they used to protect wooden boats. So that also added a really nice smell to the building, because tar never dries. And here it was actually I was very limited in the terms of the volume, because the volume is the same as the existing buildings almost. So I didn't have anything to play with, and that was rather refreshing. Here is it's just a pitched roof, and the only detail might be the extruded aluminium water drain. At this project, I also had like 1.5 years of appealing from a stupid neighbor. It's really the trial. It was extremely painful, since it's a very beautiful island to live on, but you get very depressed if you also need the city. So I couldn't really stand living there, but I had to wait until we sold the house. This is the interior. Is extremely basic. It's just a couple of living rooms, a studio, and a big kitchen to live in. And the interior is all just pine. And here was, I mean, this is also a very budget project. So, and we didn't really have to. We just bought some piles with plywood, and everything is cut and screwed on site. The same goes with all the interior. After the small houses, we have been starting doing bigger houses. And with bigger houses comes developers and the market. And this is somewhere here that I start to doubt my profession. We have done quite many of these different bigger apartment buildings. I will show you 2 examples. This is was an invited competition. It's in the center of Stockholm. It's used to be a more industrial area with factories, but nowadays it's residential area in a quite postmodernistic style done in the beginning of the 90s. Very typical Sweden, and I would say all over the world you see the same. It's a copy-paste architecture. The client here wanted to do something different. They wanted to do something that referred to the old factories that used to be here. So sort of like add some kind of history to it. And we did. We used the archetype of a factory, and I wanted it to be as close as a pastiche as possible without being one. So whatever we did, whatever detail we used, we did it for a reason. And but it's quite different in terms of how it looks compared to the earlier projects. But it tends to be that the bigger the program is, and the more repetitively, since here's apartments, I think it's 40 apartments, the more you tend to work with the grid. And I really enjoy this sort of investigation of the grid. We have the house is cladded in anodized aluminum panels. It has windows with divided into 9 with 3 windows you can open. And the grid also comes with a plan. We base all the bigger houses is sort of always focused on the plan, that the plan reflects the exterior of the building. So in this case, we have like a center place storage and kitchen units defining the apartments, and also dividing kitchen and living rooms. And so we have open spaces, the feeling of open spaces, but it's still enclosed rooms, because that's what the client wanted. Here's just a rendering from the inside. And here's building process. And here is also from the building process, the corner of the house. This was very interesting work, but in this project, as many projects in Sweden, is that if you work as an architect, you don't have all the responsibilities. You are not in charge of the economy. You don't have the budget. And actually, in this case, we have had chosen a manufacturer of the windows with very slim profiles, because the house is all about the windows and the archetype of this traditional industrial window. But then in the end of the process, of course, they choose to change these windows to with a fatter frame. And for me, this was a disaster, because I really put my life in this building, and they just changed it without my permissions. And the reason and then they said, okay, we will use this manufacturer instead. I think it was Shukku. And I said, I mean, it's not possible. I mean, I can't, we cannot do this house. So I redesigned the house and did a new version with less frames. That actually looked very good, and they were very satisfied. But the problem was that they have already got the images from the rendering agency, and they have put together a folder. So it was too late to change the design. And I mean, it sounds absurd, but this is the way it works in Sweden, I think in Scandinavia in general. And it's extremely depressing. This is also a rather depressing project. This is outside Gothenburg. It's a beautiful residential area with row houses from the 30s, villas from the beginning of the 20th century. And they want to make a new apartments, like freestanding houses in a park. And it's a very good developer, one of the biggest in Sweden. They're supposed to be very understand architecture. We did a proposal that is also based on the grid. It's a solid volumes, 2 houses divided with 2 offsetted volumes with a retracted top floor. And the reason for the shape of this building is not because I wanted it to be like this. The reason for that is that the city plan, I don't know if it's the same in other countries, but in Sweden there's like, they do a plan of the area where they do define the volumes very clear from the beginning. It can be an intern sitting at the architectural planning office in the city. Before his coffee break, he make a little plan how he wants the building to be. And then 10 years later, they ask an architect to do a house. And if you go outside these limits, it's impossible, because the appealing process is so long for a project like this. It can be like 3 years. And there's so much money involved, so nobody really would like to do anything outside the box. So actually, this house is, I quite like the offset of the 2 volumes. But the thing is that the offset is to the north instead of to the south. So now you create apartments with low quality. So if you have inverted the house or mirrored the house, it would have been much better. But same here, we work with the grid, and we are really, if we do a grid, we do the grid to the final end. We really try to keep it as consequent as possible. So this house is about the grid. And it also has to do about the way we plan the apartments. It's a building in a park, therefore I see the building as similar around when you walk around the building, that has the same expression. So therefore the rooms now the apartments are stretching along the facade, and we work with 2 center staircases. And it was also investigation to do traditional balconies and not redrawn balconies or integrated balconies. So a rather classicistic approach. This is just an early image. It's in brick. It's with the Flensburger format, so it's a quite long and narrow brick. It's a very solid building. I took this image just to explain. I mean, after this project, actually, I felt so disorientated. So I closed the office, and my employees had to go. I said, we don't do anything more now, because when I wanted the building to be as simple as possible and clear. But I want to add something. In this case, I wanted to put a sculpture on the entrance roof. You see a little sculpture? To emphasize it, to do a poetical little statement. And then the client, the developer, said to me that we have to have a meeting. And they brought their internal architect. And he explained for me that they couldn't really see the sculpture there because he thought the house was too national socialistic. he used that term. And I didn't know what to say. I mean, but then, I mean, I was really like, if this is the way they look at architecture, I mean, the way that we have done the house is also really in the architectural sort of line that surrounding buildings in park done in the 30s or 20s are done. So it's sort of like a prolonging of the history. Between this house, there's a couple of other developers, and they have done by big firms, big architectural firms in Sweden, and they don't give a shit about architecture. I mean, they just they could have been vacuum cleaner salesmen. So now the context of this house in this beautiful little park will probably look like shit because of the poor quality of the other buildings. There was a sort of like a meeting point where all the developers sit together with their architects and discuss the area so that we would do the best for this area. And as soon as I said something about the other architects' projects, if I said, why, I mean, we have decided it should be in brick now, and you clad it in concrete boards, cheap concrete boards, why do you do that? Then sort of like the leader of the meeting directly said to me that these kinds of questions we don't take in this forum. You know, so you couldn't really, you can't have a discussion about architecture. So I quitted my office. It's up running again, but this was, I guess, the last residential building we do in Sweden. The reason for, I will show you a couple of slides of 20th century architecture in Sweden. I mean, we have something really unique. And the thing is, when I go abroad and I meet you and other architects, everybody's referring to Swedish tradition with Gunnar Asplund and Sigurd Leverens and so on. And they believe that we work in the same way that they do, that we just continue the history. But it's not like that. After the 70s, it's rather dead. And I will explain you really fast, short version, why. But also the essence of things that really are important for me and at the office now when we do our projects. And something I'm really interested in is the unsecureness of good architecture. That everything there is a flaw or there is something itching, and that creates a tension. And this is one of the first projects by Gunnar Asplund, Villa Snellman, that you all know, from 1917. And I think this is a very beautiful period for him because I think he's really struggling. He doesn't really know where he's standing. He has one foot in the neoclassicistic bucket and the other one in the new modernism. So what he's trying to do is radically simplifying the previous styles, but still he can't really let go of the ornaments and the decoration. And the blend that creates that, I don't know if to call it unsecureness but whatever it is, this he sort of like creates his own character in a very beautiful way. You see, it's very very simple, but still you have a couple of small varieties. You have the little roof for the entrance. You have the glass door with its shutters. You have the ornaments over the window. But it's a beautiful example. This is the woodland from the Woodland Cemetery that you all know, that Gunnar Asplund and Sigurd Leverens won that competition. It was started in the beginning of the 90s, 1915, I think, ended in the 40s, and there's a lot of excellent buildings, as you know. This is the Chapel of Resurrection from 1925 by Leverens. And what I really like here is the way he handled the clash between the more classicistic monumental entrance port, very decorated with a temple motif, and then the chapel itself is this extremely strict ascetic volume. And we saw from the previous lecture, I think, an image from the inside that is extremely beautiful. This is also Sigurd Leverens. I mean, he did 2 really big works, and that the first was the Woodland Cemetery, but this is the Eastern Cemetery in Malmö. This is Sampaguita Chapel, also from 1925. And this was a competition that I think they started to build really early. So the early part is from the beginning of the 90s, 1917, I think. And he worked the whole life on this cemetery. So it's very interesting to follow Sigurd Leverens' work here. He actually did his last building before he died. And you can see how he developed his style. This is an extension of the Gothenburg Law Court. It's a very early example of Asplund. It was a competition that he won 1915, but it was not approved until 1936. In between that, he did some changes of the building. But he also here works with the grid, totally ascetic, very inspired by the functionalistic movement. He has these ornaments or stone ornaments over 4 windows. He actually, what I heard also, the building, the old building that is extension to is from the 17th century, and he actually finished that building to get the perfect symmetry for that building, and then he added the new volume. So his extension is actually within also the style of the old one. This was, when it was finished, it was said to be the most terrible thing ever happened to Gothenburg by the public. And now, since they don't care about the architectural history in Sweden, this is totally redecorated. The interior is destroyed. I mean, some is intact, but they used an interior office that mainly use IKEA for their products when they put in products. It's extremely strange. This is the 1930 Stockholm Exhibition. This was the start of the functionalism, and it was very inspired of the Bauhaus. There is no trace of this exhibition in Sweden because nobody really cares about it anymore. But after this, the Social Democrats got in power with Per Albin Hansson, and what they did then was created something they call folkhemmet. It was sort of like good functional homes for everyday people. It was supposed to lead to understanding and that everybody should have a good home. And the purpose was extremely fine, but it ended in low quality and segregation instead, which is really sad. But this is an example of folkhemmet architecture. This is Ralph Erskine row houses from 1946. It's a pitched roof with a little flat part in the top that makes a very archetype-like building with its own personality. This was the typical architecture until the beginning of the 60s. It was industrialized, but it was still with high-quality detailing. This is the sort of like the last building done in Sweden. After that, it's a blank paper. This is the last building by Sigurd Leverens at the Eastern Cemetery, and now he's really reduced so much. So he has sort of like now he's doing brutalism. It's totally clear. And after this, I mean, after the Second World War, there was a lack of housing, and the government decided that we really need to build a lot here. So they said we build 1 million apartments between 64 and 75, I think. And during this period, the prefabrication and sort of like the projects were taken from the architects, put to the big developers. And before, what you were supposed to build was decided by the local community, but now everything there was a program by the government. And this led to that the architects, they had the visions and did the big gestures, but but they were not in control of the building process, and the developers are now the one in control. And since then, everything is prefabricated, and the local craftsmanship is gone. So that's where we stand now. Yeah. So it's not easy now, but I think my main goal now is to sort of be a part of a changing movement, trying to add value to the society and do projects that sort of like can inspire and put more emotion to what we do. That is not only build, not only where the market is the main purpose for doing anything. I mean, now the market is, you don't rent your apartments anymore because the government sold all the apartments. So you buy apartments. So as a developer, you build, you sell, you close your company, you get a new company, buy another property, build, sell. So there is no long-term investments, and there is no maintenance of the buildings. Therefore, you can build. I mean, there is such a lack of apartments, so you can build whatever. You just put some nice renderings and a high price, and people believe in it. So it's like a new million program, but with lower quality, actually. Because the suburbs they did during the 60s and 70s, these satellite suburbs, are often quite good quality, even if the scale is very big. And now there's a lot of social problems, like everywhere in Europe. I will show you just a couple of projects that is sort of like after this. And they are in different scales. The first one is a small pavilion in Lausanne. It's Lausanne Jardin. It's like a garden. They have a garden festival, and they asked for a little pavilion. And I think that the projects now is maybe less about the program, but more about the feeling of the building. I mean, now I'm really into density and load. I think I get more and more darker, and I think I will only work with mass from now on. So the buildings from now on are about mass, I think. This is an urban context. It's a Place de Tunnel in Lausanne, and we wanted to bring in since it's a garden festival, we wanted to bring in the landscape. So we did a little platform with a pile of soil, and we planted different herbs from different areas in the Swiss Alps. So it changed from the different seasons. During winter, hopefully it's a little mountain of snow, and spring it's brown, and summer it can be flowerish. And it's just hold up, this little platform or tray is just hold up by very thin pillars, sort of like emphasizing the heaviness of this pile, but you can walk under it, but also to put it sort of like out of context. It's in the city urban environment, but it's also not really taking part. This is the first draft, and this is the building during the construction. This is the project Black House with a couple of architects involved. Angela was one of them. We were supposed to do an interpretation of the classic Black House on Isle of Harris. This is a Black House. It's a traditional family house, sort of like very heavy. It's done by stone. It's like carved in the landscape, protected from the wind and the rain. Has a quite typical shape, and it has a lot of load or density. So we were asked to, with the client and the property to do a sort of like interpretation of this. And this is was my proposal here. It's a building with it's called a building house with 4 columns, and the environment here is extremely harsh. It's I mean, the traditional houses are burrowed, sheltered from the environment. There is something extremely power in this harsh environment. And what I did is sort of like inverted the structure. So we have the tension within the building, but still it's an open building. It's a very beautiful landscape that you really will want to take part of. It's also, it's inverted to that state that it's even floating. It's not even connected to the ground. And it's a play with archetypes with these 4 columns. And in the middle we have this traditional chimney. And I wanted to stress the load of this pitched roof, and it's also coming back to maybe the ashtray from the beginning, with a more formalistic, postmodern touch. But I would say, for me, it's more a new. Factuality, that is more like everything is there for a reason, and it's simple, but it's also personal. This is a section. Interior space that are just defined of the building elements. We have the fireplace, we have the column in the corner, and we have the roof. This is the bedroom. Also play with the what is load bearing and what is not. We have a wall protecting the bedroom from the outside that is not load bearing. It's more like an object, freestanding object, still a wall. What is a wall, what is not a wall. This is a competition loss, which we did. It's a very interesting area outside Stockholm. It's an old gas facility that they used to refine gas for the street lights of Stockholm. It has been abandoned for many years, but now they will turn it into a more commercial area and residential area. And this is how it looks today. It's beautiful brick buildings done by the really good, interesting architect Ferdinand Boberg in the end of the 19th century. And the program was a bookstore on the entrance floor and then an art gallery. So in addition to this environment, and here I really had to take in consideration the context, since here was a context that mattered. The building is in the center with the small one here. So we have a main street here. We have a restaurant in this building, and we have the south here. So we wanted to create spaces for the restaurant, a connection, underground connection to this building. But this was the main street, so we had to emphasize that facade. And this is how it looks. It's more like emphasizing the main street by a fake wall, a fake facade, like like in Western movies, these towns out in the desert. And then there's just holes in this volume where there's a reason for them to be, where I've decided the reason should be. And then we have emphasized the entrance with a little roof, and we have the only ornament is the rail on the balcony. And all the windows are like framing the exterior landscape from the inside. So we work with different layers, with the window, the blinds, almost like a scenography on a theater stage. So what I said before, we will work with load, but I think openings is also what we do now. This is a model of the house. And this is the entrance, just a little rendering. It's quite inspired by the brick houses, of course, but also the way of making the volume solitaire by smear the mortar joints to get it more like abstract and more materialized. It's almost like clay, the same way that Leverens did with his church in Klippan. We also use small counterlevers holding, you don't see it here maybe, holding the bricks over the windows, and that's the only detail of the building. Here's the basement floor with the connection to the here's a connection to the restaurant building here. And this is an exhibition space. There's a lantern on the outside of the building, so the building is like this. And just with small changes in direction, we can create a path through the building. This is the main entrance floor. This is the bookstore floor. This is the last project. This is a competition win, actually, first one. It's the extension of the Gothenburg School of Business and Law in Gothenburg. This is the site. The new building is supposed to be here. And this is also very typical Sweden. I mean, this is the school. It's in the center of in Gothenburg, and it's a block, but still it works as a solitaire because this is done. This is a very nice building. This one with its extension done by Carl Nyrén. It was his first competition. He's a quite famous Swedish architect. It was done in the beginning of 50s, and then they added these things in the beginning of 90s. And now they need more space for the school. And actually, this brick building that Carl Nyrén did is extremely beautiful with detailing, extraordinary detailing. And the town have decided to keep that building because it's very important for the history. But now, since they're building a tunnel, and train tunnel under the city, they need an exit, and that exit will be in this corner. So then they just sort of like take that report that talks about the values of that building and sort of like just put it in the trash instead of taking this really poor extension from the 90s and tear that down and do something new. But I was invited, so I had to do it. This is our proposal. This is really a play of scale. We have this house to the left, existing house, very functionalistic. He got his inspiration from the courthouse from Gunnar Asplund that I showed before. It's with travertine, very strict grid. We wanted to do the same, but we wanted to do a distortion of scale to change the proportions. Because we could have done a grid here with a lot of windows, but it would have been too cladded for the context. We wanted to do something more smaller or make it more into an object. So therefore we used a very big grid and very big windows. It's all about the grid. It's a lower part with more public spaces, and the upper volume is with more offices and workshop studios. We have the same grid all over with the same windows. It's cladded in concrete. The only detail we have that is the decoration, or more decorative, is the same railway as in the rail for the roof terrace, as you saw in the project before. We often start with a lot of ornaments and a lot of different ideas integrated in the projects, but it seems like in the end they are reduced to nothing, but that's okay. Here's a street view of the building. So the proportions of the windows makes it. I wanted the density, the heaviness. I mean, it's a school of business and law. It should be representative, massive, but still light or open for the public. So I think the scale in the change of scale for the windows are making it sort of like a if you would have done a toy out of this school, like an icon of the school or the grid. This is a view from the street. It was very important here also to have respect to the existing buildings with in terms of volumes and so on and heights, because the building of Carl Norén is a very beautiful building. The process now is that after this competition win, they have decided to. They are a little bit afraid that the house is a little bit too big, too high. Nobody really know why it's too high, because if we would have done one floor more, we still would have won, because the other projects were not that good. So it's just like their personal feeling at the urban office that if somebody might think it's a little bit too high, they can appeal. And appealing a building like this is at least 3 years. So therefore, now they have stopped the process again, and now they will have a sit-down with the neighbors, and they will have to decide how high the building should be. It's incredible. I don't know what to say. Anyway, the plan is very simple. It's a grid, 7.6 meters by 7.6 meters, open space with an inner core. Yeah, that's it. And you see down to the right, you have the tunnel to this new train tunnel that also will have an exit in the building on the first floor. This is the last building. It's an interior rendering from that, looking out over the terrace, framing the landscape, working with the whole, and that's what that project is about. The next one, I don't know. We have to see. Thank you.